By the 1870s, the United States Army operated as a massive, ironclad machine. Powered by steam and steel, it could move thousands of tons of men and materiel across the continent. But that industrial muscle faced a severe physical limit when it reached the 100,000 square miles of the Great Plains. In the spring of 1876, General Phil Sheridan ordered a three-pronged military campaign. The objective was to force the independent Lakota and Cheyenne coalitions onto reservations by sending columns of cavalry and infantry deep into the Montana and Dakota territories. These advancing columns were incredibly heavy. General Alfred Terry's Dakota column, which included Lieutenant Colonel George Custer's 7th Cavalry, required 12,000 pounds of grain, rations, and ammunition every single day just to keep the men and animals alive in the field. To project that kind of force into a region with no roads, farms, or friendly settlements, an army cannot simply march. It has to drag its own survival behind it, tethered to a fragile, linear supply chain that traces all the way back to the railroad. For the Dakota column, the starting line was the railhead at Bismarck. This dirt street town marked the physical end of the American railway network and the outer limit of effortless supply. Look at this photograph of a Western railhead. You can see the point where logistics create a severe bottleneck. Everything required for the campaign has to be offloaded from those high-capacity wooden boxcars and packed into finite horse-drawn canvas wagons. Once those wagons leave the rail yard, they face brutal friction. A heavy wagon train pulled by mules moves at a crawl through the roadless, rugged coulees of the plains. The animals pulling the cargo have to eat the very grain they are hauling. A commander's operational reach is strictly capped by the math of consumption. Travel far enough from the tracks, and the draft animals will eat their entire supply payload before ever reaching the enemy. The military found a temporary workaround to the limits of overland wagons. By utilizing the deep, navigable rivers that cut across the plains, they could float their supplies into hostile territory. This is the steamboat Far West, commanded by Captain Grant Marsh. Notice the shallow draft and the immense stacks of wood loaded onto the lower deck. This vessel represented the absolute maximum extension of the government's supply tether. This map shows how the Far West pushed up the Yellowstone and Bighorn rivers. A single trip could haul 200 tons of forage, ammunition, and infantrymen, a payload that would have required hundreds of wagons and weeks of overland marching to achieve. But here is the geographic friction. This image shows the sprawling nature of a Native American encampment on the plains. Sitting Bull's coalition of Lakota and Cheyenne was highly mobile, and they had gathered miles inland, far from the navigable riverbanks. As long as the cavalry stays near the water, they are backed by the resources of the American economy. To actually engage Sitting Bull, they have to willingly step off the edge of the map and leave their deep supply lines behind. On June 21, 1876, General Terry and Lieutenant Colonel Custer met aboard the Far West and divided their forces. Custer and the 7th Cavalry were ordered to follow the Rosebud River south, moving inland to trap the coalition. The moment they leave the steamboat, they take a massive logistical downgrade. As you see here, transferring from steam power to an overland wagon train creates a slow, highly vulnerable, miles-long column exposed on the open prairie. The terrain along the Rosebud quickly became too rugged for even the wagons. Custer abandoned them, downgrading once again to a pack train of mules. A mule can carry only a fraction of a wagon's cargo, further shrinking the regiment's survival window. Driven by impatience and the fear that the village would detect his approach and scatter, Custer forced his men on a punishing night march. The exhausted troops pushed forward, leaving the slow, heavily burdened mule train trailing far behind. By outrunning the pack train, Custer severed the final link of his supply chain. His unit now operated as an isolated, finite group of men, cut off from the massive industrial network that had sustained them. On June 25th, Custer's depleted troops collided with the enemy at the Little Bighorn River. His men were malnourished, their horses were failing, and they were riding into a massive, highly unified coalition of warriors defending their families. Look closely at this Winchester repeating rifle. The cavalry carried single-shot Springfield carbines and strictly rationed ammunition. Many of the Native American warriors carried these repeating rifles, giving them overwhelming fire superiority at close range. In a fatal irony, Many of those repeaters were purchased at U.S. trading posts. Custer himself had recently testified in Washington against the very War Department officials who allowed those traders to operate and arm the enemy. The annihilation of Custer's command occurred at the point where a rigid logistics system finally overextended and snapped. In this landscape, the regiment had reached the limit of its support, leaving it to face a mobile, superior force without the weight of the industrial system behind it. The surviving elements of the 7th Cavalry under Major Reno and Captain Benteen managed to hold out on a nearby ridge. When the native forces withdrew, the soldiers hastily buried their dead, burned their excess gear to save weight, and fled back toward the river. Following this map, you can trace the desperate retreat. Captain Marsh loaded the wounded onto the far west and raced down the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. He covered 710 miles in just 54 hours, rushing back to the Bismarck railhead to deliver the news. The telegraph wires transmitted the disaster to the East Coast, sending a shockwave through a nation celebrating its centennial. The public had believed their industrial-era military was an invincible force. The Battle of the Little Bighorn proves that technological advantage and industrial scale are strictly bound by geography. The moment a military steps past the physical limits of its logistics network, the system collapses. Beyond the supply lines, nothing follows.